Welcome to our mini behind the scenes podcast series dedicated to our new project, The Field, an audio mystery set in the town of Llanantwn. In this series, we are joined by Hefin Robinson, a writer who we collaborated with on the project, and discuss the story behind making the series. We hope you enjoy. In terms of the actual process, because I think we'd given ourselves a good sort of 4-5 months where we would meet regularly, sometimes for half a day, maybe like a day, where we would sit in the office space downstairs, Julian with his pens and his flip charts and his diagrams. And we kind of, after we kind of created this wiki, you kind of create this amazing wiki that you can actually access on the Patreon. It's kind of all there in terms of the history and the industry and all of that. That's kind of all laid out there. We spent some time then looking at our characters within the space. So we spent quite a few sessions kind of breaking down who are these people, what are their relationships, what are the threads that connect people, what are the moments where actually these characters could cross over, whether they are mentioned or whether actually those characters potentially meet between scenes or are mentioned within scenes. So we spent quite a lot of time, I guess, doing a kind of character playbook where we broke down who these were, the relationships and how they connected. And then I suppose from then we would set ourselves little scenarios. So in how would we see these people interact? So we'd go away and write a little scene. We'd come back and present it to each other. We'd kind of talk to each other about it. And that was kind of quite an interesting way to work, really, where we sort of all kind of collaborated on the space, the characters, but then also these scenarios. And we'd sort of iterate from there, wouldn't we? We'd kind of talk about it, how it fitted with the world, and then go away, maybe rewrite something. I mean, how was that for you both in terms of that way of working? How did you find that?
I found it really useful. I mean, from just a practical point of view, I mean, Julian's a climber, so he took the climbers, because otherwise, I mean, I would have had to write just, whoop, here I am climbing the mountain. Where am I putting my foot? I don't know. You know, I wouldn't have a clue how to write that. In the same way, you took, if I remember, the two kind of like teenage young women.
Being so young.
Being in my 20s.
But it just made sense that you're going to be able to write young women better than me or Julian.
Yeah.
So that was useful, I think. But also, it was that thing again of perspective. And I think having 3 different people go away makes something come back. We were getting 3 different perspectives on the same idea, as opposed to one writer going away and doing everything.
I think that was really important, I think, because, and I think if we do manage to kind of like build on the pilot season, then I feel almost like the more extreme perspectives, the better in some ways. You know, I think that feels like you want those stories to really take people out, you know, to different edges of this town that's been surrounded by this field. You know, like we want them to go and explore what is out there. And it felt like they almost all had, as you were saying earlier, Ali, they had different feels and they had different, almost like frequencies, if that makes a sense. And I think each one of those frequencies almost kind of like then worked together or didn't work together when you chopped them up and put them together. You know, you had this one that was definitely getting to resolution. You had this one that was getting to a very definitive cliffhanger. You know, and it's almost like all of the little versions of storytelling or stories to a degree were in there in mini form, and then they were just kind of being jumbled up. And I think that worked well, and I think it was potentially, at least at the start, easier for individuals to do their thing, and then we could look at it as a whole afterwards. But otherwise, I think you'd always it's a bit like if when you're doing something and you know you've got to do like 6 of them or 7 of them, your first 3 are either amazing or your last 3 are amazing. And meaning the first 3 you've learnt from, and then the last 3, and you've made new rules up by the end of it, and you're like, well, I'm going to have to go and do the new first 3, or the reverse of it. I had some great ideas in the first 3, it really petered out on the last bit. You know what I mean? I think it felt like that. I think we all had definite 1 or 2, or like 1 or 2 kind of stories in us, specifically within the field. And then from that, the others came from, in a way, naturally, because it was like, oh, well, we kind of feel like we need to be over here then, because none of these are exploring this aspect of the field, right? So we need this kind of thing, or this kind of thing to like juxtapose it, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because I'm sure we had more than 5 at one point. I'm sure we did lose a thread, or we changed it at least. We very heavily or drastically edited it to being something very different, because it felt like it was almost like 2 threads were identical, almost.
They were kind of doing the same thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And there was always that question of, how many characters can we have before you start to lose control of who's who? And obviously we're working in audio, so we don't have that visual clue. Like, we don't have, oh, it's the bald guy, or so it's much harder to differentiate between characters. We worked hard in making sure that the voices were quite different. But yeah, I think that was a big thing, wasn't it? Making sure, actually, do we need these 2 characters, because are they doing the same job as another 2 characters? And at the same time, are they overcomplicating, especially if we're going to present this in a completely randomized order?
Yeah, I mean, that was huge. I think there's 2 versions to that as well, isn't there? Where fundamentally we only had a small amount of money to produce it. We had a limited budget on how many actors we could literally have. And like you say, it's a bit like the last season or 2 seasons of Game of Thrones, where there's definitive groups of people that are then eventually going to come together at the end, right? And you can, as you said, you can keep track, because instantly you go to the visual, go, okay, we're now in this group, now in this group, that. And our instant knowing where you are in this group, I guess, came in the form of distinctly different characters in terms of age, and therefore voice and sex. And then also then later on working with Jak Poore in terms of the audio itself, making sure that almost each strand had a slightly different audio feel as well. Yeah, so I think they were our attempt at doing something similar to how a TV show would instantly go, okay, now you're with this group, or you're with that group, or that group.
It's the kind of like the audio equivalent of like the establishing shot, isn't it? It's like, how do we... And it goes back to that, what you said about feel, and creating that feel. Oh, okay, I feel like we're back with the taxi driver now, or we're back with whatever.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crafted Reality with me, Alison John, and my partner in crime, Julian Sykes. Remember to like and subscribe, and share with anyone you think might be interested. And if you really like the podcast, remember we have a brand new Patreon page. The link is in the show notes. We appreciate all of your support. Thanks for joining us again, and we will catch you next time.